Picture this, nothing dramatic happened, no fight, no betrayal, no obvious mistake, and yet something shifted. Their text slowed, their enthusiasm softened, and you're left replaying every moment wondering, when did this start? Here's the unsettling truth. Most people never see coming. The moment attraction begins to fade is rarely loud. It's quiet, polite, invisible. And for many people, it starts at the exact moment they became too available and didn't notice. Let me pull you into a familiar story. Two people meet. There's spark, mystery, that delicious uncertainty that makes your phone feel like it weighs 1,000 pounds. You don't know where you stand, and that tension is intoxicating. Then something subtle happens. You decide to be easygoing. You respond faster. You rearrange your schedule. You start thinking, why play games when I can just show interest? Sounds healthy, right? Except what you don't realize is that attraction doesn't die from honesty. It dies from predictability without earned investment. This is where Act 1 quietly begins. You're not chasing. You're not needy. You're just always there, emotionally, mentally, energetically. You become the person who replies instantly, who says yes even when it's inconvenient, who offers reassurance before it's been asked for. And here's the uncomfortable part. Availability feels like kindness to you, but to the other person, it removes the sense of discovery. And human desire needs discovery the way fire needs oxygen. Now, quick pause, because if you're thinking, so I'm supposed to be cold and distant, relax. No one is asking you to become a villain in your own love story. The problem isn't presence, it's premature presence. You're giving end of relationship energy at the beginning. That's like bringing a wedding gift to a first date. Sweet? Yes. Alarming? Also yes. Here's the shift most people miss. Attraction isn't built by how much you give. It's built by how much the other person gets to give back. When there's no space for them to lean in, to wonder, to earn access to you, something vital shuts down inside them. Not because they're bad people, but because desire responds to momentum, not convenience. And this is where fear creeps in, because the moment you sense their energy change, your instinct is to close the gap, to explain more, to offer more, to be more available, which feels logical, but quietly accelerates the very outcome you're trying to avoid. What's fascinating and slightly terrifying is that the moment you became too available didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like security, like maturity, like finally doing things right. But underneath it, a dynamic was forming that you couldn't see yet. One where they stopped pursuing because there was nothing left to pursue. And here's the question that lingers as we move forward. If availability isn't the villain, then what exactly crossed the line, and how do you spot it before it costs you attraction? Let's move into the moment where things quietly tilt, the part no one warns you about because it feels so reasonable while it's happening. Act 2 begins not with rejection, but with reassurance. You tell yourself, this is good. This feels calm, stable, the adrenaline is gone, and you mistake the absence of anxiety for the presence of intimacy. But calm isn't intimacy yet, it's just comfort. And comfort, when it arrives too early, can dull desire instead of deepening it. Here's what starts to happen beneath the surface. You stop letting plans unfold naturally and start optimizing for closeness. You keep your calendar open just in case. You check your phone not with excitement, but with responsibility. You become the person who's easy to fit in, easy to rely on, easy to postpone. And no one ever wakes up thinking, I'm going to lose attraction today. It happens because ease slowly replaces effort. There's a psychological shift here that's uncomfortable to admit. When someone doesn't have to work to access you, your time, your attention, your emotional labor, they don't register it as valuable, not consciously. They won't say, oh, you're too available, therefore I'm less attracted. Instead, they'll say vague things like, I'm just not sure what I want, or something feels off, or the classic, you deserve better. Translation, the polarity has flattened. And let's inject a little humor before this gets too heavy, because if overgiving were an Olympic sport, some of us would have gold medals by now. We'd be standing on the podium waving like, I answered every text in under 30 seconds, thank you very much. But attraction doesn't clap for self-sacrifice. It responds to tension, curiosity, and the sense that being with you is something to be earned, not assumed. Now here's where urgency sneaks in. The more you feel them pulling back, the more you lean forward. You offer clarity when they offer confusion. You bring consistency where they bring unpredictability. Again, it feels loving. But dynamics don't respond to intention. They respond to behavior. And the behavior says, no matter how little you give, I'll fill the gap. At this point, something critical breaks. Reciprocity. Relationships thrive on a rhythm of give and take. But when you're always giving first, you rob the other person of the chance to invest. And without investment, there's no attachment. Without attachment, there's no urgency to keep you. Here's the cliff edge moment most people miss. The issue is no longer that you're too available. It's that you're no longer being chosen. You're simply present, reliable, guaranteed, and desire doesn't grow toward what's guaranteed. It grows toward what feels alive, unfolding, slightly uncertain. So if you're feeling that knot in your stomach right now, wondering whether you accidentally trained someone to value you less by giving them more, stay with me. Because the next part isn't about pulling away to manipulate. It's about understanding the exact point where availability should have been replaced with boundaries. And once you see that line clearly, you'll never cross it unconsciously again. Now we enter the turning point, the moment when awareness arrives a little too late, but still in time to change everything. Act 3 doesn't start with action. It starts with realization. You notice you're the one initiating most of the conversations. You're the one keeping the connection alive. And suddenly it hits you. If you stop trying, the relationship might simply stop. That realization doesn't just sting. It destabilizes your sense of power. Here's where fear sharpens, because pulling back feels risky. You worry, if I don't show up the same way, won't I lose them? But here's the paradox most people never hear. You weren't keeping them by being endlessly available. You were delaying the moment they had to decide. And desire doesn't strengthen in indecision, it erodes there. Let's clear something up before we go further. This is not about disappearing. It's not about waiting. 3 hours to reply while staring at your phone like it owes you money. It's about reintroducing self-respect into the dynamic. About letting your time, attention, and emotional energy reflect discernment, not fear. Think of attraction like a conversation between two nervous systems. When one person is always leaning forward, the other unconsciously leans back to regain balance. Not because they want distance, but because equilibrium demands it. The moment you stopped allowing that balance, the connection began to tilt. Here's the subtle shift that changes everything. Instead of asking, how do I show them I care? The question becomes, is this connection expanding my life or consuming it? That question alone creates internal gravity. Suddenly you're not reacting to their energy, you're responding from your own center. And here's where excitement sneaks back in, because when you stop being predictably available, something reawakens. You don't announce it, you don't explain it, you simply live a full life again. You let plans take shape instead of forcing them. You let silence exist without rushing to fill it. And in that space, something fascinating happens. They either lean in or they drift away. Both outcomes are wins. I know that sounds bold, but stay with me. If they lean in, it's because desire has room to breathe again. If they drift away, it's because the connection was being held together by your effort alone. Either way, you regain clarity, and clarity is power. Now, quick question. Have you ever noticed how people suddenly value something more the moment it stops being guaranteed? That's not manipulation, that's human psychology. When access feels earned again, attention sharpens, curiosity returns, and attraction has a chance to reset. But here's the part that most people get wrong next, and it's crucial: reclaiming your availability without understanding. This next principle can swing the pendulum too far in the other direction, and that mistake creates a whole new problem. Here's where most people stumble, even after they've had the realization. They finally see that being endlessly available diluted attraction, so they overcorrect. They become distant, strategic, emotionally unavailable in the name of self-respect. And for a moment, it feels powerful, like taking control back after giving too much for too long. But this isn't balance, it's whiplash. And attraction doesn't thrive in confusion either. This part matters because the goal was never to withdraw love. It was to stop overextending it. There's a difference. When you swing from constant availability to emotional absence, the other person doesn't suddenly feel desire, they feel uncertainty without safety. That doesn't create attraction, it creates anxiety. And anxious dynamics don't lead to healthy pursuit, they lead to push and pull exhaustion. The real shift happens when your availability becomes intentional instead of automatic. You don't disappear. You don't perform indifference. You simply stop making yourself smaller to keep someone comfortable. You stop rearranging your entire life around potential moments with them. You allow your yes to mean something again. Let me make this tangible. When someone suggests last-minute plans and you're already busy, you don't cancel your life to accommodate them. And you don't explain yourself like you're on trial. A calm, grounded, I already have plans, but another time could be great sends a message far louder than any speech ever could. It says, I value connection and I value myself. That combination is magnetic. Here's the fascinating psychological turn when you reclaim your center. You stop monitoring their behavior so closely. You're no longer counting response times or decoding tone shifts like it's a final exam. And ironically, that's often the exact moment they start paying closer attention to you. Not because you pulled away, but because you stopped chasing clarity from someone who hadn't earned that level of access. There's also a quiet confidence that returns here. You no longer need reassurance to feel safe. You're okay with things unfolding instead of being defined immediately. That patience creates emotional depth. It signals maturity, and it subtly challenges the other person to meet you where you are or reveal that they can't. Now, let's interrupt this intensity for a second with a reality check. If someone only shows interest when you're less available, they weren't responding to you. They were responding to access. And access without effort is forgettable. That's not a loss. That's information. This is where urgency sharpens again. Because staying in a dynamic where you are valued only when you withhold is just as draining as one where you overgive. The sweet spot, the one almost no one is taught, is where warmth meets boundaries, where interest is expressed but not poured out unchecked, where availability is earned through consistency, not demanded through anxiety. And here's the question that hangs in the air now. How do you maintain that balance long term without slipping back into over-availability or hardening into emotional distance? Because the final piece isn't about what you do with them. It's about what you stop doing with yourself. And that's where everything truly changes. This is where everything comes together, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a quiet internal decision. The final shift isn't about changing your texting habits or your dating strategy. It's about changing the relationship you have with your own time, energy, and worth. Because the moment you became too available wasn't really about them at all. It was about the M. It meant you stopped checking in with yourself. Here's the truth most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. Over-availability is often a form of self-abandonment dressed up as love. You tell yourself you're being open, flexible, understanding, but underneath it, there's a hope that if you give enough, you'll secure certainty. And certainty feels like safety. The problem is attraction doesn't grow in safety alone. It grows where two whole people choose each other, not where one person compensates for the lack of choice. When you stop making someone else the center of your emotional world, something powerful happens. You no longer feel the urge to rush connection. You're okay letting things develop at the pace they're meant to. You don't confuse intensity with intimacy or proximity with commitment. You allow people to reveal who they are through their effort, not their words. And here's the subtle confidence that emerges. You no longer fear being too much or not enough. You understand that the right dynamic doesn't require you to contort yourself into constant availability. It requires presence with boundaries, warmth with discernment, interest without overinvestment. Let me ask you something that might stop you in your tracks. If someone can only feel attracted to you when you are endlessly accessible, were they ever truly choosing you or just enjoying the convenience? That question isn't meant to harden you. It's meant to free you. Because the moment you reclaim your life, your routines, your passions, your friendships, you stop negotiating your worth through attention. You don't need to be chased. And you don't need to chase. You simply become someone whose presence adds value, not someone who fills space. And here's the quiet ending that most people never expect. When you stop being too available, you don't lose the right people. You lose confusion. You lose imbalance. You lose dynamics where your effort was doing all the heavy lifting. What remains is clarity, and clarity is the most attractive energy there is. So if you've been wondering when things changed, when the spark dimmed without explanation, now you know. It wasn't one text, one moment, one mistake. It was a gradual drift away from yourself. And the most powerful part, you can return to yourself at any moment. That's not a tactic. That's a choice. And once you make it, the entire dynamic changes. whether with them or with someone better waiting ahead.